everybody. Welcome to the Historic New Orleans Collection. I'm Daniel Hammer. I am President and CEO of the Historic New Orleans Collection, and I am very pleased and honored to welcome you all here tonight for this wonderful program, The History of Southern Decadence. I'm really looking forward to learning about the history of decadence. I know about decadence today, but I know nothing about its origins, so I'm excited about the program tonight. I'd like to share with you all also that we're excited to work to present this program tonight with the LGBT Archives Project, an organization that we've been working with for some time now. The Historic New Orleans Collection and the Archives Project have been working together since the founding of the Archives Project in 2012. The Archives Project has been instrumental in directing a number of important donations of materials to our collection, and these materials have in turn helped us to make strides in diversifying our collections, which is a really important goal of our organization, to strive to be inclusive and diverse in everything we do, including in what we collect. And we're grateful to the Archives Project for their work with us in the extent to which that helps facilitate our efforts to reach those goals. Currently, we're also working with the LGBT Archives Project on a book project to document the history of the Black LGBT community here in New Orleans. That's a project that we are in the early stages of working with them to conceive, and we're looking forward to bringing to publication in the coming years. So really important initiative. And we're also official partners in next year's conference commemorating the 50th anniversary of the Upstairs Lounge fire. Before the Decadence festivities begin next week, we're here tonight to learn about the origins and evolution of Southern Decadence. Decadence is now the third largest event on New Orleans' annual calendar, with an economic impact of approximately $300 million. However, it did not start that way. Tonight, we'll get the inside story from the founders themselves about how their house party got started and how it grew and grew and grew. Historian and author Frank Perez will moderate the conversation and introduce the panel. Frank serves as the executive director of the LGBT Archives Project of Louisiana and has authored several books on New Orleans queer history. He's the founder and captain of the Crew de la Rue Royale Revelers. And as you all know, Frank always wears a hat, and so I haven't seen... Oh, there he is. Hi, Frank. Come on up.
Thank you, Daniel. And good evening, everyone. How are you? Good. Doing well. Before we get started tonight, I want to acknowledge a few really important guests. We have our one of two current Southern Decadence Grand Marshals with us tonight. Danny girl, would you wave at everybody? Danny has been working really hard and promises a truly depraved and debaucherous parade, and for that we are grateful. We do have, I see, a few other former Grand Marshals with us. Kathleen Conlon, would you wave at everybody? Grand Marshal in 1986. Way in the back, I see Miss Love, who was Grand Marshal in 1997. Let's see who else we have here. We have Tiffany Alexander from 2011. Aubrey Sinclair from 2014. Frankie Fierce from 2015. And are there any other former Grand Marshals here? Okay, well, thank you for coming. So tonight we have gathered here to not only celebrate the 50th anniversary of Southern Decadence, but also to learn about how it got started. And we are going to do that because we have 5 of the original founders of that first party here, and we're going to hear from them. Let's give it up for them. I will officially introduce them once they come on stage, but before that, to set up our discussion, I want to show you a few slides. And these slides are actual original invitations that were created by founder Robert Laurent. Robert, wave at everybody. And they cover the years 1972 to 1980, and that's going to be the scope of our conversation tonight. So the first one is, I can see you've gathered the subtleties of this invitation. Y'all come. It may be a little difficult to read this, but at the very bottom, it says, to the dress up as your favorite Southern Decadent, party at Belle Reve, 2110 Barracks, so forth and so on. So it was a costume party at a home called Belle Reve, which we'll learn a lot more about in a few moments. This was the Sunday before Labor Day, 1972. What most people don't realize is there was another party 2 weeks later. Come back to Belle Reve. This party was to celebrate or say goodbye to the departure of one of the original Decadents, Michael Evers, who is pictured here. Michael Evers and his partner David Randolph lived at 2110 Barracks, which became really the center of social life for this original group of friends. Here is the invitation to the 73 party. The 73 party was met at Matasses, did not have a parade marshal, but that was the first parade. Second party, or third, depending on how you count, first parade, no grand marshal. This is the 74 invitation. The 74 parade was the first year that there was a grand marshal, and that grand marshal was someone you all, many of you at least know, Frederick Wright, who is no longer with us. 75. That is Chris Owens, a giant Chris Owens, on top of the then recently opened Superdome. And Jerome was Williams was the parade marshal that year, her better known as Miss Pickle, who is no longer with us. So here we have the 75, or 76 invite, excuse me. This was the year that Preston Hemmings, who is with us tonight, Preston, wave at everybody, was Grand Marshal. 77 was the year that Robert Laurent, who designed all these invitations, was Grand Marshal, and we'll hear about this in a bit. 78 was an important year. The first year, there were 2 Grand Marshals, and there's a very specific reason for that that we'll learn this evening. 1979, Bruce Harris was the Grand Marshal. Bruce drank a lot of beer, and that was the inspiration for this. And then the 1980 invitation. This year was a very significant year for a number of reasons. It was after this year that the original founders, most of which anyway, had kind of moved on with their lives. But it was also this year that the parade was hijacked. Parade Captain Tom Tippen is with us. Tom, wave at everybody. And we will learn about that. This was the last year that the parade originated or started at Matasses. So that, I think, sets us up for our discussion tonight. At this point, I would like to invite the original founders of Southern Decadence to come on stage. Okay. So, by way of introductions, let me start right here. This is Preston Hemmings. Preston, say hello. Howdy. Next to Preston, we have Maureen Block, often referred to as the mother of Southern Decadence. Her husband, Charlie. And next to Charlie, we have Robert Laurent, who designed all those invitations. And next to Robert is Tom Tippen. So let's start with how you all got to know each other. You were a very tight-knit, close group of friends. Belle Reve, the home in Tremay, was kind of the center of your social life. Robert, would you start us off by just telling us about how you all came together and what it was like to just socialize at Belle Reve?
All right. Can you hear me? Was this working? Michael Evers, to me, is the hub. That's how I know Frederick. That's how I know so many of the people. Charlie and Maureen moved back to New Orleans from New York in August 72, and we decided to have a party. And that's really how it started.
Now, Belle Reve was not exactly a state-of-the-art modern facility.
It was
Maureen, what were your impressions of the Belle Reve the first time you saw it?
Well, they wanted me to live there, and I said I couldn't. The floors were, can you hear me? The floors were tilted. It was not in a good neighborhood and all that. So I declined to live there, but I partied there. And go ahead.
Architecturally, it was a fabulous house. It was a shotgun, side porch, out of the living room. You know, it was an old. This has got to be probably 1880s, I would think. It was a great place with a lot of mystique.
Preston, do you have any remembrances of Belle Reve?
Do you remember the Grateful Dead song, Broke Down Palace? That's basically what it was. And it had slave quarters, didn't it? Mm-hmm. And it was a great place to party.
And Tom, what do you remember about Belle Reve?
I really didn't. Well, I'd also mainly partied there. I kids and lived elsewhere, but I made it over there a fair amount.
So it was the home of Michael Evers and David Randolph, but in a sense it was much more than that. It was actually a commune that housed various people at different times. Can you tell us, I think at any given time there were, 6 or 7, maybe 8 people living there. Do you have any memories of who some of those people might have been?
What happened was David Randolph's stepfather died in Michigan. And so he left to go to take care of a baby clothes factory that the family owned. Michael left 2 weeks later, because that's why we had the going away party. Well, then to rent it, it was a rotating cast. Ed Seal, Jerome Williams, Robert King, Judy Shapiro, David Red for a while all lived there. And so the house was still in, that's why the second parade, we walked from Matasas back to the house to have a party at the house.
So, and what was like a typical weekend there? I know you all played games a lot in the backyard. I'm sure there was a lot of marijuana smoking and other maybe narcotic usage. Can you comment on that? Anybody?
Well,
I was really good at rolling joints.
I dispel the issue that we were drug-crazed hippies, because we were not.
Maybe you weren't.
I was not.
Okay. Well, you playfully nicknamed yourselves the Southern Decadence. So who came up with that? Where did that come from?
It all began because Charlie and Maureen moved from Manhattan for her to go to graduate school at Tulane. And Maureen, being Maureen, constantly would complain, I miss my New York Times. Oh, it's so decadent here. It's humid, it's hot. And we, to kind of shut her up, would just reply, oh, come back to Belle Reve. And that's where the nickname came from.
I have to admit, I was very unhappy. There was nothing going on the weekend before Labor Day, and it was so hot. So we picked the worst weekend, and that's how Decadence started.
And that weekend is also the very height of hurricane season as well.
We have missed
So,
a few
yeah.
because of that.
So whatever happened to Belle Reve?
David sold it.
David Randolph, who owned the home,
I don't, like 2 or 3 years later, he came back to town and tried to fix it up to sell it. And by that time, when the parade, instead of ending at a party, the parade became the party.
So let's talk a little bit about how the parade got started. In 1972, there was not a parade at either one of those parties.
No, but it was a costume party.
But the following year, you decided to do it again. And whose idea was it to start in costume at Matas's?
That I can claim. We had begun playing cards every week, and as the anniversary approached, I didn't think they would take me up on it, but I said, well, let's do it again, but let's meet at Matas's and walk to the house, and everyone agreed.
Matas's had 75-cent drinks. So that's why it started at Matas's. It was very friendly to all types of people, and that's why we kind of gathered at Matas's.
Any other thoughts on that?
We'll get to this a little bit later about another character, but sorry. We'll get to this a bit later with another character that was there at the beginning nearly, Russell. And he came into Matas's one day. I mean, remember, 75-cent cocktails, right? Russell comes in. I'd like, was it 36 cents?
37 cents worth of gin.
37 cents worth of gin, please. Okay. That's where we were.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that in the early 70s, a lot of the bars were segregated, but Matas's not so much. And you all were a very diversified group, black, white, gay, straight, the whole 9 yards, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
I think we were liberal.
so what was that first parade in 1973 without a grand marshal like? Was it more of just a bar crawl, or did you stay at Matas's, or what happened?
We gathered at Matas's. Well, in the film, you see it, all I did was stand at the door in the street, and about 24 people came out, and Frederick knew a woman who had, a black woman, Clayton. She had Big Marshall Shalimar Club in Tremay, a bar, and that was our one pit stop on the way back to the house. It was so hot, we needed refreshments.
So, and you were all at that 73 event, right?
I was in California.
You were in California. That explains why you don't remember much. I'm wondering about the rest of it.
We'll get to my part soon.
I'm sure. Okay, so in 74, you decided to do it again. Was there any debate on who was going to be the parade marshal? It wasn't called Grand Marshal yet. It was called a parade marshal.
Well, since I was in control of the invitation, no one had a say except me. So and I knew Frederick was visiting friends in Denver, got the address and just mailed him. Then he learned about it when he got it in the mail.
So he didn't know until he read the invitation.
Right, exactly.
And his costume, he came as bad news. And he had a T-shirt with all kinds of disaster news stories pinned all over his shirt, and he was a grand marshal.
So, Maureen, Charlie, Tom, I'm wondering what your memories of Frederick and thoughts about him are.
Well, I wanted to say that we lived at 518 Burgundy, and so a lot of people would congregate at our house and then walk down to Matas's. So we got to be sort of the hub.
My fondest memory of that parade, we're on Rampart Street, and Frederick he's got a baton, the whole thing, and the man is going, he loved it. He's going down the street, we're headed toward Esplanade, and this car pulls up with these women who, I think they were coming from church, and it kind of, the traffic stopped or whatever, and the window is open in the back seat, and they have fried chicken in a box. Frederick reaches in, I want some chicken. And the lady with the chicken in the box says, "Please don't take my breasts." Which he didn't. He grabbed a drumstick. And yeah, it was, I fall asleep every night with that memory. Okay.
Tom or Robert, do you have any thoughts and memories of Frederick?
Oh, well, of course. He was working at, teaching at Notre Dame, and his mother, Audrey, lived in Lafayette, and he came in one time. He was every few months he passed through, and evidently he had gone to Lafayette and not stayed long enough, because I'm at my house, he's visiting. The phone rings, and it's Audrey, so I handed Frederick the phone. Well, Audrey was complaining that she had hardly seen him. He wasn't there very long, and he said, "Well, Audrey, it just shows you not only got to get a quick look, but you got to get a good look." So that was Dr. Wright.
Yeah. We met Frederick, I had met him, I was going to Southeastern, and I drove over with a friend. We went to a party in Lafayette, and that's where I first met Frederick. And then he came to Hammond one time. Anyway, we got to be friends, and Frederick actually showed up at our wedding. He'd driven up, we were married way up in Topeka, and he came up for that. And so we got to be really good friends, and just a fabulous person, incredible person. If you ever met him, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't know him, trust me.
Frederick was a professor at Notre Dame, and one time before one of the parades, the night before one of the parades, we were coming home. We were coming home to Charlie and Maureen's house, but it was like home, and it had been raining, and Frederick and I are standing near the curb, and he looks down in the gutter, and there in the water is his Notre Dame ID. And Charlie accused him of staging the whole thing, but I was there, and I'll tell you, it was not staged. I also remember that night him singing Under the Boardwalk for hours. He kept putting quarters in the jukebox and kept singing Under the Boardwalk. But one of my favorite memories of Frederick, I think it was about 77, when the protesters began to show up. And the year I was marshal, 76, there was a guy holding a sign saying "God hates fags." That's the first protester I remember. But I think it was the next year, or maybe after that, there was a guy holding a poster board with a Bible verse on it. But I couldn't read the thing because he was shaking it and screaming. And I looked at Fred, and consider the fact we were not drunk, we were not stoned, we were boiled. And I'm trying to look at this sign, and I looked at Frederick and I said, Frederick, what does that sign say? And Frederick looks up and goes, what sign, Preston? And he was just definitely one of my favorite human beings, and also one of the smartest human beings I ever knew.
So, do you remember what Frederick costumed as in his parade?
Bad news.
No, I couldn't understand.
Bad news.
He was Uncle Sam. He had red, white, and blue.
He also had an Uncle Sam motif,
And
which,
a hat,
you know,
and a whistle. He had a whistle.
yes, I remember Frederick telling me that when he received your invitation in the mail, he ran out and bought a baton and a whistle. He was so excited. And I don't know, I doubt that he thought about it or you all thought about it at the time, but in 1974, to have a gay black man dressed up as Uncle Sam leading a parade was pretty subversive. Do you want to claim credit for that, or just?
And stealing chicken.
And stealing chicken.
I
Yeah.
think we were ahead of our times for whatever reason.
Into the mic.
I think we were ahead of our time for whatever reason, you know, and I don't know exactly why, but I went to college in the 60s, so that was part of it, loving and accepting everyone.
The only agenda was to have a good time, to make
Well, we
each
had
other
that
laugh.
too.
Yeah.
We were the way we thought America should be. Old, young, black, white, straight, gay.
Whatever.
And it's a shame that America is not that way. But it is amazing to think of the way we were in that time.
Frederick, maybe one other thing, but at least this thing. Frederick was tear gassed in Chicago at the riots. He's running down the street to get away from the tear gas, right? He was like in the Newman Club, which is a Catholic boys' club, which in college, right? And so he knew Governor McKithen. And he is running down the street to get away from the tear gas, and this limousine pulls up and gets stopped, and Frederick is right there, and Governor McKithen is in the limousine, rolls down the window just as the cloud hit the car. And so the gov got gassed also.
The best part of it was the governor said, "What are you guys doing here?" And Frederick says, "Well, right now, Governor, we're running from the police."
Well, wasn't there a few times, was it that year that you ran into District Attorney Harry Connick at Cosimo's and he was none too pleased?
That was one of the years. What was the bar?
The Cosmos.
Oh.
Cosmos. Yeah, Cosmos.
As we arrived, he was leaving, and he gave a big scowl look at us, and but didn't call for assistance anyway.
So in those early years, did the police give you any grief at all, or?
No.
We walked away. We walked as fast as we could. We were a real ragtag bunch of people, just kind of walking down the street, some in more elaborate costumes than others. And we moved fast, we went into bars, and we tried to avoid the police.
Not that there weren't some ugly moments. I'm sorry to say, at the end of that parade in '74, there was this can-shaking lowlife who had followed the parade, and the rumor went around Belle Reve that this guy had raped a girl at the parade the year before. And some friend of yours from Chicago, the lowlife spoke to this guy the wrong way, and he decked him. And he got mad and started yelling about what he'd done the year before, and he picks the guy up, and I mean, he started spreading that boy out like apple butter. And he he's wailing on the guy, and Charlie and another guy, a black gentleman, broke up. It wasn't a fight, it was a massacre. But there were some ugly moments, but I don't ever remember any problem from the police.
We used to go down Rampart Street, was one of our bailiwicks, and I remember it's the same weekend as the Black Men of Labor. So it was really great. Here's our little ragtag group of people going one way and the Black Men of Labor coming the other. We were all kind of synchronized.
So was it the 74 parade that ended at Belle Reve that resulted in a theft of some drugs?
Well, I think so, but we need Robert King, poor thing, to ask about that. I mean, I would have learned about that much after the
So
parade.
Robert King, who was Grand Marshal in
78.
79. You were 77. Anyway.
I
No,
was
Bruce
four.
Harris was
I was
Anyway,
four.
Robert King, who lived in the slaves' quarters at Belle Reve, had a bag of weed that was stolen. And that was because so many people had joined the parade that were not part of the original group.
Well, yeah.
Isn't that what caused
Right.
you all to stop
Well,
having
that
the parade
and also
end at
that
Belle Reve?
that and also that the house was
was up for sale?
Yeah.
So it was at that point that the focus of Southern Decadence shifted from let's get to the house party at Belle Reve to the parade itself.
Yeah, the parade became the party.
The parade became the party.
Right.
And so in 1976, Preston, you were Grand Marshal. Tell us about your experience.
Well, first of all, by that time we were deciding over the bourrée table who was going to be the marshal next year. And Maureen started suggesting we should have a straight every third year. And
Sorry, guys.
during the 75 parade, I was feeling no pain, and I was walking. I don't remember where we were walking. It was on Earth somewhere, but we were walking, and everybody was just having such a good time, and I was out there, and I laid down in front of a car. And Charlie and Bruce came and picked me up, and I could not stop laughing, and I think that's the moment that I became parade marshal. But I did have a
It
couple.
is.
I had a couple of firsts. Now, I always like to say I was the first straight to lead a gay parade. Now, mind you, Frederick Wright always said straights can't lead a gay parade. But I always like to say I was the first straight. I also invented the entrance. I sat up the night before cutting up red, white, and blue confetti. Mind you, this was the bicentennial year. And my costume was the delegate from Louisiana, and I had a straw boater and flags in it. And I'm cutting up confetti all night. And I go down and I park on Burgundy Street somewhere, and I'm trying to get a cab to Johnny Matassis, and no cab will pick me up because I'm in a tuxedo with a straw boater and flags. And finally, this guy in a white fleet cab is laughing his ass off, and he picks me up and he brings me, and I invented the entrance. I showed up in a white fleet cab, throwing red, white, and blue confetti everywhere.
It was a grand entrance.
From that point on, people had to make an entrance. I also was the first Grand Marshal to perform. We went to Funky Butts, and I had been down the Friday before, and I'd asked the bartender, could you set up a microphone by the piano? And he said, oh, yeah, sure. Well, of course, we get there, and there's no microphone. But, and I don't know how many people heard it, but I played Every Man a King, except at the end I alternated it with Every Man a Queen. And when we left Funky Butts, that was one of the first cat calls I heard. Some girl started, Funky Butts is a really small place, and by this time there were about 200 people in the parade. And I stopped when we came out of Funky Butts, and this girl started saying, "What are all these queers doing out here?" And the girl next to her said, "It's some kind of gay parade." And I turned to her and I said, "Well, technically it's not a gay parade." And she said, "Yeah, but there's a lot of gay people in it." And I said, "Yeah, well, there are." And those were some of my, that was actually the first sign that there were going to be people who objected. And then, of course, later our boys with the signs showed up, as you're going to see on Sunday.
So for those of you who may not be aware, "Every Man a King" was a campaign song that for Huey P. Long, so it kind of played into that political thing. So I'm curious, how many people participated in the parade around this time, and were there weren't crowds on the street, on the sidewalk waiting for you? No. How many people participated in the parade, in these early parades?
Well, each year it got larger. And so by the time 1980 rolled around, I mean, it was thousands of people, hundreds of people, let's say. And you couldn't, when you hit a bar, you couldn't get a drink. So that's why Frederick and I thought we were so clever and asked Tom in 1980, "Where's your next stop?" And we went on ahead and we sat on a stool in a nice air-conditioned bar and waited and waited and waited, and the parade never came.
Let's hear from Tom. You were a Grand Marshal in 1980, and that was a really significant turning point for Decadence. What happened?
Oh, I also wanted to bring up first, for Preston, we were in front of the Marriott one year, and he decided to bring a crowd of tourists that had come out in front waiting for a bus, and decided to break into what was, oh shoot, God Bless America. Don't you want to, and coax them all, and this whole crowd joined right in. Yeah. But 1980, the year before, my little sister invited this band to accompany us, and I didn't think much about it one way or the other. Next year, when I'm the marshal, and I get there, they started berating me for being 15 minutes later than I was supposed to be there to leave. So I'm thinking, this does not look too good. And sure enough, the further we went, we got to Jackson Square, and they wanted to know where I was going to go next, because the whole deal was that the marshal decided the route. You know, it's up to you. So I said, well, we're going to go down towards Canal, we'll hit the Seamen's bars down, you know, the sailors' bars down there. They didn't want to do that. And so we got into it. And I think at some point I did threaten the drummer with kicking the drum so far up his backside he'd have to play by putting sticks down his throat. Didn't help much, because I headed with the few people that were with us down to the sailors' bars. The band went the other way, playing the music, and the parade left with them.
And we thought that was very déclassé. I was standing about 10 feet from the leader of the band and Tom, and I remember them just screaming at each other. And it was the leader of the Tumblers who said, "We're going to Jackson Square." And Tom is saying, "No, we're going to the Greek bars." And the protocol at that time was that the parade route is subject to the parade marshal's whim. And so we all thought, everybody at this table thought, that Tom was in the right, and we went with Tom, but the parade went the other way, and there were a lot of hard feelings about that.
Good story, though.
So not only was that a literal split, it was also a metaphorical foreshadowing, because in 1981 the parade started for the first time at the Golden Lantern. You all had pretty much moved on with your lives, The Grand Marshal in 81 was Tommy Stefan, KKT, and it got really gay in the 1980s. And before we move into
It did.
Q&A, I would like for you to comment on that transition or that pivotal year. Anybody?
I kind of bowed out because I had a child to raise. When he was little, he was part of Southern Decadence in the carriage. Okay, we had family and friends that used to march. I want everybody to know that. My parents also marched. I remember my mother was Lillian Carter, and she brought her own rocking chair and would set it down and sit in it. So I had my parents, my child, and all that for the early years. But as Andrew got older, I kind of bowed out.
Actually, my parents came down one year. We borrowed a pickup truck, threw the furniture in the back, and went as the Joad family.
We did.
Yeah. True Southern decadence.
So, Preston, do you want to say something?
I was just on top of that very dark moment I referred to in '74. My favorite pleasant moment was one that Tom was talking about in '79. We were at the Greek bars, and I came out front, and I was dressed as AMVET. I had white pants. I had a red jacket that I'd stolen from the UNO cafeteria, and it was a waiter's jacket, and I had my uncle's red Washington Artillery Overseas cap, and I was AMVET. And this gentleman comes out, and he's wearing a blue star-spangled dress. And we're looking at each other. I'm in red, and he's in blue and stars, and we're talking about how well our costumes complement each other. And I just burst out, "God bless America." And before I knew it, there are 15 guys in dresses standing around me singing, "Land That I Love." And there's a bunch of Japanese tourists across the street, and they are going batshit, taking pictures. One of them pushes another one out of the way so he can take pictures. And that's what Tom was talking. That's probably my favorite decadence memory of all, is "God Bless America" in front of the Greek bars.
Well, before we move on to Q&A, and you are going to have an opportunity to ask questions, I just want to make one observation and get your thoughts. Most people may not realize it, but every year when the parade originates at the Golden Lantern, these folks are nearby in their lawn chairs. They don't want attention. They don't want to be recognized, but they're there. And I am wondering, what the hell are you thinking when you see what is happening? What do you think about what decadence has become?
A lot of it is that there's some people I only see once a year. So hopefully we will run into Olive and different people, you know.
Fish.
Yeah.
I think we have a lot of pride in what it's become, you know, and we're sort of awestruck and sit back and watch it all.
Yeah, to us, I mean, to me anyway, it's like we didn't intend for this to happen. It just did happen. And it's, you know, there's that thing about the butterfly flaps its wings somewhere in the world and then chaos ensues. Well, here we are, speaking to you guys tonight. Yeah, it's just, you know, it's turned into this incredible thing. And it's, you know, who knew?
There's
The idea of it becoming a gay parade had a sort of inevitability to it. 4 of the first marshals were straight, but that was when it was our parade. It was, you know, like Spanky and our gang's clubhouse, and it just, you know, there were 20 people, and then there were 50 people. In the year I was marshal, there were like 200. And by the time Tom was marshal, there were 1,000, and there were more and more gay people who kept showing up because, of course, they're watching all these people express their freedom as they chose, And so it becoming officially a gay parade, I kind of have always seen as inevitable.
I would just want to say one thing about some marshals that aren't here. Kathleen Kavanaugh and Robert King. Kathleen's living out in Charleston. Robert King passed on years ago. He was the one living in the slave quarter of Belle Reve. But they were the first dual grand marshals. They are both our son's godparents. And like Maureen said, Andrew was there, our son Andrew was there in a stroller, you know, from way, I mean, yeah. We met Robert King while we were living in New York, and a few other people, and he got us into this group that we now have, that you see in front of you. He introduced us to people when we all came back down together. When we moved to New Orleans, Robert King and another fellow, Robert Gore, drove down here with us, and they got us involved with this crowd.
Well, let's add that the reason there were two marshals was that they were both party people, and we expected at least one of them maybe would make it to the end of the parade.
They figured that out, too.
You have to understand, these people were the partyingest people. We've often asked ourselves, who started this? And I've always figured it was somewhere between Maureen and Robert, because it was like, hey, a pigeon died on Canal Street. Party! And Maureen would frequently say, and Preston, the next party is at your house. And we, you know, at Jazz Fest, at state parks, in the French Quarter for Decadence, we partied all the time. We partied everywhere. It was a party crowd, so I think it was kind of natural. If anybody was going to invent decadence, it would be us.
I wanted to say something. I think, to me, we gather each year and hold up a wall at the Golden Lantern, but there's a certain spirituality, because when it was COVID, a group of us just gathered at Matassa's on the corner with our masks on, but just to be there. And last year, there was not an official parade, and it was like the old days. We were a ragtag group, and some people said, this is more fun than the big parades. So, you know, there's a certain spirituality. We just had to be there, you know.
Yeah, Louis Matassa still has the grocery store. And so some years ago, we decided we better put a plaque up there. And the plaque, if you go by the grocery store, you'll see it on St. Philip Street on the side of the grocery store. And the plaque says, through this portal of Matassa's Bar from 1973 to 1980, the initial Southern Decadence paraders marched into history. Yeah, should have read it off that one.
On that note, I think we're going to open it up to Q&A. We do have an after party, which I'm assuming you all approve of, to get to. So, Amy,
we just need, anybody can ask a question, we just need you to ask it into a mic, because the people at home can only hear what's being said into the mic. So let's open it up. Who has a question? I have a question.
Yes, Miss Love.
Hello, Russell.
Robert, I have a lot of questions for the panel, but Robert, specifically you're the first one to name two grand marshals. Now it's been 22 years after going back to one throughout those 22 years. How do you feel about it being gone to 2, to 3, to 4, to 5? What's next, 20, 30? would you like to see it go back to 1, or do you want to just keep it within the 3 or the 4 or 5
Well,
maybe?
I think 2 is fine, but I mean, it's so beyond our control. Let people do what they want.
We are along for the ride.
I think it should be 1. It should be a big honor. I objected to this whole
And
tableau.
he should make an entrance.
I just, when this was starting up in New Orleans, what's the timeline? What were other cities? Were they doing anything similar? Like, I know Pride Parades eventually happened, but gay-themed parades or?
It was not happening anywhere to our knowledge. It was before Gay Pride.
The word gay was still pretty new in the culture. I don't think I'd been hearing the word gay for more than a couple of years. And I remember one night in the 90s, Maureen looks at me and tells me, "Preston, you've been outed." And I said, "I've been outed?" She goes, "Yeah, you were mentioned in an article." And I said, "But Maureen, I was never in." And she said, "Well, you've been outed anyway."
I was always concerned about, I was Tulane faculty, so I was always slightly concerned since it's a very conservative college. So I always wore a hat and gloves and was very careful. I hate to admit that now because I'm very proud of it, but in the day, I was somewhat reticent sometimes when it got really wild.
I was teaching in Jefferson Parish, and I didn't give a damn what anybody thought.
Hi, not a question, but a comment. You guys mentioned the first year that they had Bible-beating protesters. Was that 77? Doesn't matter.
76, the year I was
Okay.
parade marshal. Is the first year I remember seeing them, and the guy with the sign, and then a couple of years later, there were more people, and I think one of those guys became pretty well known in the news.
Yeah, Reverend Storm
Yeah.
from the West Bank. Yeah, that guy. Anyway.
The comment is, I think it's very important that everyone keeps in mind the fact that no children get raped at the Southern Decadence Parade,
Right.
and lots of children have been raped at Southern Baptist churches throughout the decades.
Yep.
So when they come out here protesting the gay parade with their Bible quotes and all that stuff, I think it's very important that we remind them of that fact.
So last year, when we were on our little, we had a very small parade. The old folks were riding around in golf carts, and so we had a sound system on top of one of the golf carts, and we are at what's now it used to be the double play, the crossing. We were at the crossing. We'd stopped there, and the Bible folks showed up across the street. And so I requested a song as we marched away, "Sympathy for the Devil" by the Rolling Stones.
Pleased to meet you.
I've got to wait for the mic.
At the first party, Charlie and I were trying to put together a band. She was asking if we had any music. At the first party, Charlie and I were trying to form a band, which never really came together, and we basically had a glorified rehearsal at the party. And then in '76, I did Every Man a King at Funky Butts, but there wasn't any music, and the next music was the Tumblers, who helped break up the parade because they were insistent on going to Jackson Square. So not really a lot of music in those first years. The marching band was in, are we talking about the Tumblers or today's marching bands today? The Tumblers were in 1980, and that's when Tom and the head of the Tumblers started screaming at each other, and the parade went in two different directions.
I think what you're referring to are the official marching bands. That would have started after the parade became officially recognized by the city. The first parade permits were issued in 1997, but it was still nothing like it is now, so it would have been after that.
We've got two questions. So sorry, we've got two questions from our Zoom audience. The first one, how was the Golden Lantern chosen to be the starting point for the parade? And the next question is, what do you see as the future of Southern Decadence, and how important is this celebration in the current world?
The reason the Golden Lantern became the start, Robert King, that was his favorite bar. And he, for several years when we still did the parade, he wanted, we need to start at Matassa's. I mean, we need to start at the Golden Lantern. Matassa's doesn't do anything for us. And I said, well, it's tradition to start at Matassa's. Well, what happened after the parade broke up in 1980, because people weren't paying attention, they followed the music, and the parade just fell apart. The next year I was out of town, and it was a question, I mean, it was been there, done that. I didn't offer to do an invitation. Nobody did anything. But Robert King called his friend Tommy Stephan and said, take it over. Started at the Lantern. And it was a number of years before we realized it was still going on. You know?
And Matassa's had closed. And Matassa's had closed, too. Right. Matassa's had closed.
Well, eventually it did, but not that. I mean, if we had wanted to do it in 81, it was open.
Originally, the Golden Lantern is where the parade ended.
Right.
And the lads had a nickname for it. They called it the Golden Latrine. But originally, that was where I know that was where the parade ended my year. And, you know, I was very cooperative marshal. Jerome and Frederick and everybody else would come up to me and say, we want to go here next. The only stop I had planned was Funky Butts, and they told me in no uncertain terms we were ending at the Golden Lantern. That's where it used to end.
Preston, please explain about crossing Canal Street and going through the hotel.
Was that where we went in one door and came out the other? Yeah. I don't know how Robert got that on film. The doors, the street corners were perpendicular, and I noticed that the doors on both sides were open, so I led the parade in one door and out the other. And it's a great video.
The Roosevelt Hotel. Okay.
I don't know how Robert got that
without
video,
a permit,
but he did. No permit.
So I've been informed that we are out of time, but we are all going to be at the Toulouse Street Theater. That's the old One-Eyed Jacks. I'm sure they'll be happy to entertain more questions there. At this point, let's all give it up for the founders of Southern Decadence. And if you don't know where the after party is, we're going to exit the building and go to the right to Toulouse Street, hang a right, and then it'll be there on the left. Thank you for coming.